Yes, have Adam up here. The future of Phobos. Whew. All right, this sounds like a good one to lead into DConf today. Take it away.
Well, hi there, everyone. My name's Adam, and I've been around D for a very long time, since about 2011. So I have some opinions on things, and Walter wrangled me into this project, mostly by fact that we live near each other, and he decided that I needed something more to do with my life. We're going to talk a little bit today about the what we're calling version 3 of Phobos. And now, Walter will try and tell you that I wanted this and that this is my idea. It's not. This whole thing started with a document that he sent me, that he wrote up. Why does Walter want Phobos 3? The language has changed quite a bit since the original Phobos 2 was written and designed. Not by a little, by a lot. And so there's a lot in Phobos that could just be done better with the tools we have today. Another thing that's happened over the intervening probably, almost 20 years at this point, is the industry's kind of changed how it does things. We have to evolve with them. And frankly, we made some choices that sounded like a really good idea at the time that weren't, as experience has demonstrated. But okay, why Phobos 3? Mostly this. The biggest mistake that everyone kind of agrees was a mistake is autodecoding. Autodecoding is just going away. We didn't want to do it in Phobos 2 because, and this is what the screenshot here is for, this is a pull request by Steven, just to get Phobos ready to try to get rid of autodecoding. And it's a 184-line diff. Basically, it requires that we go through every file, line by line, audit every method, and see, okay, does this thing trigger an autodecode? It means we have to do it in place. And this was a fun one that came up. If you don't do it right, you can have a case where you can silently trigger an autodecode on a method that doesn't actually support autodecoding, and then things blow up. And so then we looked and we said, okay, well, what else would we want to do? Now that we've opened up this idea that we have to go through Phobos line by line anyway, what else would we like to do? Everyone on the forums, and a few people here, have been begging for nogc and nothrow because much of Phobos just doesn't do that. And then other things started happening, like, oh, we want to redesign ranges. Oh, we would like to redo how I/O works. You know, Phobos has this problem with everything imports everything else. So we'd like to get rid of that, or at least as much as we can. This next one here, reduce template usage, that comes from Walter specifically, although I think a lot of people here would agree with that. And then there were some other things that we were like, should we throw this in here? Are these things we can do at the same time? So like redesigning how the packages are actually structured, improving the consistency of like the APIs. The other thing that came up is because we're doing additions, which I am not going to talk about today, that's for other people. But then the discussion came up of, well, do we want to align Phobos with an addition or not? What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks of doing that? Before we get too far down the road here, I want to set some ground rules for standard library design. First, the standard library is used by everybody, which means we have to support everybody. There's going to be a lot of things where people come in and say, but if you could just do this way, we could get this, performance increase, or we could have this, compilation benefit. Well, okay, that's all true, but if it means that we can't support everybody, then we have in fact failed. Standard libraries are standard. They have to do standard things. They have to do them consistently. A lot of people will tell you, particularly people who review D, and I've actually seen videos of guys, they're just writing code and they go through, oh, well, this was really hard to do. And it's like, okay. Consistency helps these people come join the language. So a large part of what we're looking at with this is how do we make it easier for new people to come on board? And that means that, for pretty much everyone in this room who is a high-powered D programmer, you're going to look at some of this stuff and you're going to go, but why? This is why. And finally, this has come up time and time again in discussions because everyone cares. Performance is a concern, but it is not the top concern. Standard libraries cannot say, well, but if you just write me this one special data structure that does everything I need in the fastest mode that I need it, then I'll be happy. It's like, okay, but we now have to maintain that. We're not you. We don't necessarily have the expertise to do that. So anything that goes into the standard library absolutely has to perform, and everything about what DLF and the maintainers do, they have to be able to maintain that for you. It's a concern, but we can't just take in everything that says, oh, we can improve performance with this special hack. Autodecoding is gone, but Phobos 2 is going to keep it. And this is going to come up later because Phobos 2 is going to stay. And this does mean that you can use Phobos 2 and Phobos 3 together. And you have to be careful because you can trigger autodecoding when you do it. The next thing is Phobos 3 will not have any support for wchar or dchar. You just get char, or an immutable char array, aka strings. This is because you look anywhere, the world has standardized on UTF-8. It just has. Some people will say, oh, but Windows uses UTF-16. Well, use by wchar then. It works. Just go do that. The other thing that we're going to fix while we're in here is Phobos 2 throws on invalid Unicode. We will be adding methods to use replacement character stuff because that is actually the correct way per the UTF standard. Yes, here we go. nogc. Anyone who's ever used Phobos will tell you that Phobos uses the GC all over the place. Personally, I'm a big fan of the GC. However, when we're dealing with standard libraries, we have to accept that just because we, the implementers, may or may not like something, does not mean that everyone can use it. So this goes back to broad applicability. Looking through the code, most of the use cases are actually for buffers and exceptions. And there's some stuff moving on exceptions. For example, Timon has suggested a weak nogc that allows throwing without the allocation for throwing. And I think I heard a rumor that Attila might be working on a dip for that. That will probably actually be coming. Nothrow, my experience talking to people on the forums and here is that the problem that people have with it isn't actually the exceptions, it's the allocations triggered by the exceptions. Of course, we could use a sum type solution if we had that. We don't. But if we combine nothrow with nogc, then we can say, okay, now you have a true nogc, nothrow, no allocation method. Honestly, my personal opinion, if we've hit an exception and you're allocating for the exception, things have gone so wrong that, the price to pay is minimal, but again, personal opinion. This actually came up in a recent DLF meeting. nogc APIs tend to look very different than GC APIs. We could pass in a buffer, we could pass in an allocator, but we're going to be doing something different with a garbage collector API that just says, here is the result, allocated and set up for you. Paul Bacchus came up with this and talked about it. I could be wrong. Sorry if I got the wrong name out there. What we're actually talking about doing is building a low-level API that take in like a pre-allocated buffer, you can fill them out and then send back, and then you return back the error code. And then what we can do is we can write the high-level API that wraps that and does throwing and pre-allocates the buffer using the GC so that it looks like what you guys are used to if that's what you've been using. But anybody who needs the nogc, nothrow guarantees can drop down to that low-level API. One of the things that came up in the conversation was, where do we put these things? The open question here is, do we want to put them in a separate package or we just put them next to the method? Personal opinion, put them in a separate package. The nogc people can just say, oh, well, we can just take this little bit that we need and import that without having to import the whole world. That's my opinion. If you guys have a different opinion, love to hear about it. So, ranges. Honestly, I have nothing to say on this because Mr. Jonathan Davis is going to be giving an entire talk on this topic tomorrow. Right there, yeah. So, I have nothing to say on that. That's for him. This is another thing that came partly from Walter, but partly from other people. Overhauling the I/O system. Now, there's a lot of different things that go on there. A lot of people want us to support terminal colors, which I think is great. But the big thing that came up was most of our file I/O is actually a very thin wrapper over C file I/O. There's a lot of things that we could do differently, better, if we went with a different style of I/O. And one that keeps getting recommended is Steven's std.io. I've talked to him about it. He said that, it would probably need some more work and, it's not really ready for Phobos. And it's like, okay, but dude, you wrote the I/O library that people actually like. So, but this is an example of the kind of stuff that we could be doing. We would like to look around at what's out there and say, okay, you've done something really cool. What would it take to get it into Phobos so that we're not constantly redesigning things? Yes, Stephen?
The person who really wrote that was Martin Nowak, and he kind of sent it off on me. So I'm maintaining it, but he's the genius behind it.
Excellent. I do believe, talking with Stephen, he said even then it would need some rework. It's not really designed in the Phobos style, and we would probably have to go add other things. Yes. Everyone loves to complain about this. This is a compile times related problem. One of the first things I actually did when I was starting to look into this project was go look through just what at the top of the file the import list was. And yes, we do import everything into pretty much everywhere. And I was talking with Jonathan last night, and he actually explained that a good chunk of this is because Phobos has such a long tail, such a long history, that there's been a lot of stuff that's been moved around. Because of that, there's imports that are either left over or they're kept because we need to do a public import and alias to get these things where they used to be so that we don't break code. But with Phobos 3, we can break code because no one's actually using it right now. So hooray. As you've seen, everyone loves to talk about compilation speed. Excessive template instantiation is a particular problem in Phobos. I do believe that we are currently looking at about 30,000 symbols generated right now. Ricky will correct me in the chat because he's the guy who actually did that research. The other thing that came up after we started doing this was Walter wanted to go in and look at std.conf.2. He found an absolute rat's nest of templates that made it very difficult for him to figure out the change he wanted to make. I asked around about that one particular, and it turns out that there's a lot of good reasons for why those templates are there. So this is going to be one of those cases where it's like we would like to reduce as much as we can, but D is a meta-programming language, and everyone here loves templates. So yes, Walter?
This is one of my hot buttons. One time I was decided to look at what happens when you try to convert a string to an integer, like A to I. Mm-hmm. Okay, a trivial function. So I go looking into Phobos, and it instantiated 11 templates deep before it actually did the conversion. Why on earth are 11 templates, stacked on top of each other required to do an A to I? It just seems like complete madness to me. I see that over and over again in Phobos. These apparently are things that should be simple are just layers and layers and layers of templates.
I actually agree with you because of the second point here. I have tried to look at some Phobos code and I go, nope, I can't even figure out what this is doing. It obfuscates the code. It makes it hard to read. If you're stacking templates 11 layers deep, do you really know what's going on there without spending the rest of the day looking at and trying to figure out what's going on there?
Just a general comment, Adam, is the thing is that you have to run the thing in your head, right? I mean, basically, you have to run the expansion.
Yeah.
Right? So 11 layers deep, nobody's running that expansion. I mean, if they are, they're on some drug that I don't have.
If you find out which drug that is, I'd love to get the name of it, because I need it too. So one of the guidelines that I'd like to introduce is please start with an untemplated function if you can get away with doing that. I love templates. I love what we can do with them. And I've seen this happen, they'll say, oh, well, we can make it faster if we template it. That's great. Please bring evidence that it actually does make it faster. because otherwise we're just adding things in there because we think that it's going to do something. We're engineers.
And that it matters.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah, exactly.
it's faster, but if it's something you do once a day, who cares if you save
Yeah.
5 milliseconds?
So he said if it's something you do once a day or, very infrequently in code, does it matter? Now, with the standard library, we do have to be careful because we don't know when code we write is going to end up in a hot section of somebody else's code. That said, we do need to be cognizant of the fact that 10 layers or 11 layers of templates is a little excessive. One layer? Yeah, one layer I could reason about. And if you want to say, okay, bring a template for performance, you can include a proof. It doesn't need to be a formal proof. Just say, hey, look, here was the effect on my machine. And then we'll go, okay, we can have a conversation about that. The other thing that we're going to change, as you guys may have recalled, I just mentioned that Phobos generates about 35,000 somewhere in there symbols, which is actually a bit of a problem. What we're going to do is we're going to go from std dot and then a flat package system to a slightly deeper package system. There's a few reasons for that. One, pay as you go. If you don't need to import that trunk, don't. And you won't ever have to pay for the compilation time of it. You won't have to pay the runtime cost of it. You can just ignore it. The other reason is, as everyone here knows, Windows is special. On Windows, there is a limit of symbols you can have in a dynamic link library. And that limit is 64K, and this currently does impact us on Phobos on Windows right now because we are so close to that limit in terms of what Windows is actually used to, and it may even have a runtime cost. I don't know, Ricky will tell me how wrong I am. The other thing that ended up kind of coming out of this discussion is we said, okay, people struggle to port Phobos to new platforms such that everyone I've talked to who tried it said, yeah, we just don't bother. Well, what if we were to say the only one that you have to port is Phobos.sys? And Phobos.sys is going to end up including most of the stuff that you're familiar with. Text, data, and net are pretty much what they sound like. Phobos.txt is going to be where things like your by dchar and by wchar live. Data is things like CSV, JSON, and then net is sockets, and there's like a URI. These things can expand and grow, but one of the things we can do is we can say, okay, these Phobos.data package is actually its own DLL, and then that reduces the symbol load for other packages. This is kind of what it might look like conceptually. On the bottom, this is the everything you have to have package. And then these packages, including other packages, can be built on top of that. So it's a little more like an onion or a layered system. There's another interesting thing that this allows us to do. It allows us to say, well, Phobos.sys can never import any of those. And so this also would help reduce the interdependency issues that may crop up because we can just take a look at a PR and say, wait, no, you can't import that. If you're trying to import .text, we say, no, you have to go use by dchar or whatever the correct method is to get the support for string in. The other thing we can do if we want to, and I don't have strong opinions on this one, although from talking to people already this week, they kind of agree that we're going to end up doing something like this. All other packages can use nogc and nothrow, but they have no obligation to. So we can say Phobos.sys, you're likely to get, in almost every case, a nogc nothrow function that you can use in whatever code you want to use it in. But if you want to go, say, Phobos.net and you're trying to work with sockets and the socket library has to allocate a buffer and that's just what you're going to get, then we can say, okay, well, this package, you're just going to have to deal with that. I want to stop there for a second and say, some of these decisions are not set in stone yet. Some of this is. I mean, you heard Walter's rant on templates. I think, if it's coming from the top guy, it's that's pretty well set in stone. But some of this is we get to have a negotiation, a discussion on, and this is one of those areas. And now I get to do the one that's probably going to make somebody mad for various different reasons. One of the things that we frequently get criticized, somewhat unfairly in my opinion, but we do, is how hard it is to find things in Phobos. There's a few different decisions that were made early on when we were designing the stuff, as before I even joined in 2011 for some of this, that make it more difficult. And there's actually been now research done to kind of, and I'll show that on the next slide, a link to that, to show that we actually, not only do we need to concern ourselves with this, but that there are, in fact, good strategies and bad strategies for doing so. And an example of accessibility is actually in std.conf. Conf is a non-standard abbreviation for convert. In fact, I don't know that I've ever actually seen it done that way. And I understand that people don't want to write out import std.convert. However, if you don't speak English as your native language, and Microsoft has entire departments devoted to this. I used to work for them. I had to sit through the training, and they'll tell you this. It's very difficult for somebody who hasn't been involved with the language for a very long time and just knows that std.conf is std.convert. They're going to sit there and go, what's this conf thing? I don't get it. What does it mean? Because it doesn't mean anything in the English language that they're trying to translate to. We can't just say, oh, well, just go read the manual, because the manual says the same thing. We are going to have to come up with more standardized English to say, okay, no, we actually mean convert here. And if you use more consistent naming rules, I guess, for lack of a better term, then people can actually start to intuit, well, okay, this method's probably here, and this by this name is probably what I want. And the longest thread on the GitHub discussion forum where we hash some of this out is actually on the difference between count until and index of. There's multiple levels of consistency. There's consistency within the library. There's consistency with other libraries that we're going to get into naming. Obviously, follow the D-style guide. But one of the things that we think might actually help us here is go do a survey of other languages. What does C++ call it? What does C# call it? What does Java call it? What does Python call it? So these are languages that we tend to draw our user base from and say, okay, look, everyone else calls it this. Then we should probably just call it that too, because that's what every other engineer is going to recognize. If we can't find a clear choice, we need to actually list in the documentation and make it searchable to say, okay, count until is like index of. You might mean this. That way Google can read the page and go, oh, they might actually mean an index of. Now, with the count until example, there is a very specific reason why it was named that. It has to do with how ranges work, and not all ranges are, they have like a index. Okay, cool. We can do that, and we can say, okay, well, we need to keep the count until name because it works generically for all ranges in our language. But so many times on the forums, and particularly in Discord, we'll be on there and somebody say, where's index of? Well, and then we have to say, well, it's actually this. In general, we want to prefer whole words over abbreviations and acronyms, except when they're industry standard. Like if you want to use HTTP, use it. Why? Because if you're a programmer and you don't know what HTTP is, your problem isn't D. Okay? Just saying. So where this comes from specifically is this research study here. It was published in 2021, Section 2, Part G, if you want to go look it up. Oh, this is a fun slide. This is the slide where I get to make people mad. Jonathan and I have gone back and forth over cur time for probably a year now. This is intended as an example. I am not saying that we have to change cur time to now, but in C#, they use now. In Java, they use the default constructor. Okay, so we're going to struggle there. On this second one, Walter and I have gone around this one for hours. I might be willing to give up because there does appear in programming to be a special case where ln is actually line. Print ln is in C++ and Java. But it does point out one of the things that I was talking about is prefer whole words. In this case, write ln doesn't translate to anything, but when I put write line, somebody who doesn't speak English would go, oh yeah, I know what you mean. I can translate that in my head. This, of course, down here is the other example of, yes, folks, I am sorry about the fact that we went from 8 characters to, that's what, 16 characters there to get to convert.to. What I will say is, originally, when I wrote this up, I did not call it Phobos. I called it lib, because I thought, you know what? I know people in D, they hate typing in general, and so they're going to want to keep the shortest name possible for the root package. I got overruled. I'm not going to name names.
That's me.
Thank you, Attila. This, because of Attila, is what we're stuck with. If you want to contribute, there's going to be some rule changes. These rule changes are because of, people say we don't listen to the people on the forums. We do. First off, we're going to maintain a list of who maintains what modules. That list will determine who's required reviews on PRs for Phobos. If you're on that list, you will have 7 days to respond. If you do not respond, that will be considered an approval. If you're on holiday, let us know. If you're temporarily unavailable, let us know. We can extend. Or if there's multiple maintainers listed for a module, we can pass it over to a different maintainer. That's another option.
So I want to say, if you are in holidays, you have all day long to review PRs. So you have no excuses.
Default of approval will be a disaster. What will happen is Phobos will accumulate a large amount of crap with that. And because we've done that before, and that's what happens. It has to be if the required reviewer does not respond, he gets fired. And, it has to be approved by somebody in management or it doesn't go in.
Well, yes. And this has always been a struggle of trying to figure out how to deal with this, because so many times you'll see people say, oh, they didn't review it.
I think it's also pretty different. Some things can go in, it'll be fine because it'll be a bug fix or something like that. But for instance, new public symbols is a different category, I would say, to get approved.
Oh, yeah. This is, as I said, this is a tough one because the community is sitting there. And when you look at Phobos, it actually, and you can say, oh, this is a good thing. It hasn't changed much. Things pile up in the review queues. And yes, we are a volunteer project, so review queues are always a problem. But we need something to sort of kickstart this and get people to actually review their stuff.
I guess someday D will, it's happening gradually, but someday it be quite an important language maybe. And how does that change sort of people who are using it for enterprise things, maybe quite sensitive things, where if you look at some of what's happened to other open source things, SSH, if I put myself in the position of a corporate user, which I guess doesn't require much imagination, then I'd be quite disturbed. Not tomorrow, but over time.
I think what you're trying to say is it's like, okay, if a reviewer comes in and says, well, can't look at this right now, but I can look at it in the future, or they just don't.
I mean, like, it's life, right? If you've got other stuff going on, particularly in obscure things or obscure and unpleasant things.
One of the things we could do is we could say, okay, there's like a group of people, very small group of people, who can review anything. And we can appeal, they can appeal to say, okay, look, this person who's responsible for this module, they're not getting back to me. I need somebody at DLF to come in and say, either yes or no, this is going in, or this needs these changes. Another thing that pops up, and we see this a lot, is people will come in, disagree with a way that the implementation is done, and then the conversation on a PR kind of dies and nothing happens. So another change that I'm proposing here is that if you're going to disagree, please provide an alternative for why, an alternative implementation and an explanation of why you think that's better. It's like saying, you think you have a better idea, come in and prove it. We're all about trying to get the best code in. And if you think that the person did it wrong, show us your better way. Don't just come in, say you're wrong, and blow up the conversation, and everyone just says, well, we can't do anything with that. Particularly in the case of new features, like we're trying to add something. If you come in and say, oh, no, we're just not going to do it that way, then, we can't, okay, but we're trying to get this thing in.
There's another aspect to that, is that once something gets merged into the library, we're stuck with it forever.
Yep.
So the default should not be.
Are we stuck with it forever, or are we stuck with it till the next version?
We're stuck with it forever. We're not getting rid of the current Phobos. We're just simply sort of putting it aside and doing new stuff because we are not going to break existing code. So if somebody's not getting their great idea merged because of silence, they need to come on a news group and make some noise.
Okay, well, let's talk about versioning a little bit.
Versioning is still supporting this thing forever.
But what you can do, particularly if you follow Semver, which is a popular versioning strategy, you can say, okay, in the next major version, we will break this. And for somebody who is still using the older version, they can just keep on using it.
I think there's some disagreement about the extent of responsibility incurred by the term supporting. Like right now, the level of effort that goes on with Phobos functions is significantly beyond just fix issues. Like an issue can also be like, I tried this with a type, I've never used it before, and it gives me a compiler error. That's the sort of thing that I would argue we shouldn't support in a version that is not the current one.
Okay.
And so, sorry, with that in mind, it's plausible. I'm not convinced, but it is plausible that the remaining maintenance effort for the previous versions that we, yes, do support forever is not going to be that high.
That's actually kind of what this slide's about. Because as Walter said, Phobos 2 is not going away. We'll continue to support it, but the support's fairly limited. Bug fixes, support for new operating systems, new additions, and that's about it. And every project out there has something like this, where they say, you know what? We're not going full support for everything we've ever done. .NET doesn't do this. Like if you try to use a .NET 5 project right now, enjoy the security bugs you have because they're not going to fix them. That's just how this stuff goes. No one has infinite resources to maintain stuff. So we can do something like an LTS and then a short-term support. We could do that. These are things that haven't been decided yet. But as an example, Phobos 2 will still be supported. And you'll still be able to use it, even in Phobos v3 projects. Don't know why you would, but that's a different problem.
There's a question of we support this. Well, the thing is that with the additions and things moving forward and defaulting to the latest, the we support frontier narrows significantly for those that are walking forward, right? We're not ditching it. I understand there's a weight or an obligation or whatever in the backward, but there is a narrowing for many people that experience where you actually does narrow and it does actually resolve, and there is some benefit. And I'm definitely sympathetic to the this is fixed in the latest version method of doing things, because at that point you have significantly less dependency worries. You have a collapsing frontier, hopefully.
Yeah.
Brief question on the additions, and you mentioned semantic versioning. So you have this ability to retire features that maybe weren't done very well, and you have a new edition that's out. But libraries will be written depending on, I presume, an edition of the Phobos as well. So I'm guessing it's going to be available via dub or the code.dlang.org. So the question is, will this mean that, let's suppose a typical project has 10 dependencies, and depending on when the library was written, it's going to use a different edition of Phobos. Does that mean the typical project will have like 2 or 3 editions of Phobos that it has to compile against?
Yes, and so we talked about how Phobos 2 needs to work alongside Phobos 3. It's that same idea of you're going to be able to compile different versions of Phobos into the same application, because one of the things that Walter wants is he wants Phobos 3 to be source only. So it's literally just the compiler runs, pulls it in, and can make what it needs to out of it. Again, we haven't actually worked with the full story. We don't actually have like the full story of here's how all the distribution is going to work. I'm kind of operating based on what I've seen other languages do. So it could be something like Phobos 3 is in the Phobos 3 folder, and then Phobos 4 is in the Phobos 4 folder, and the compiler can just go, oh, this one needs 4, this one needs 3, based on dub. And so by default, the compiler would use the latest, but dub can go in and say, oh, here, use Phobos 3. We don't have a complete story for that yet, mostly because we don't have Phobos 3 yet. That's why we say it will coexist alongside Phobos 2. They are distinct entities that can be used in the same code base. The idea behind Phobos 3 is that we're building a foundation, and this comes up all the time because we had a lot of people that originally were super excited about it, and they said, oh, I want to completely change how ranges work, or I want to completely change how I/O works, or everyone had their sort of bugaboo that they wanted to change, and we kind of had to say, well, that's really not the goal of what we're doing here. So, when? Honestly, I have no idea. This is a huge project. I think Walter had a better idea of just how huge it was when he handed it off to me than I did. So the answer is whenever it's done. We would like it to be aligned with the first edition. Whether or not that actually ends up happening is kind of up to whether or not those of us who do work on the library get it done, because the library is just not as popular. Everyone wants to work on language features, and they want to work on the compiler, and Phobos kind of just gets left over here, and the few of us who care come in and try to do what we can. And, frankly, we all have full-time jobs that don't pay us to work on Phobos. It is what it is, and that's kind of the end of it. Big or small? This has been another perennial debate on the forums. Should Phobos be a small library or a big, expansive library that covers not as much as possible? I hate to say that, but think big like Java or C#. Although, interestingly, C++ is actually working on becoming a big standard library as well. They have a lot of working groups going on a lot of different things. Graphics, they're getting a graphics library at some point in the future, which I'm not saying we need to do. But the point is that the general trend in the industry is away from small standard libraries. This would actually make it easier for other people to come in, and it would allow us to become that memory-safe alternative to C++ that we are supposed to be. And, Phobos 4. There will be a Phobos 4, because we're talking about aligning to editions now. These packages that I've listed, these are ones that have come up. I'm not saying these have to be on the list. We're talking about way in the future now. Once we have the foundation of Phobos 3, we can start to expand what Phobos can do in a standardized fashion. At this point, we would also probably introduce a process similar to dips for saying, hey, I'd like to add this functionality, this module, whatever. It would allow us to make use of additions, which is why we think it's important that editions and Phobos versions be aligned with each other. And then you could do something like this. If you remember, we had the 2 layers. Well, now we have 3 layers, because obviously HTTP is going to need some networking and it's going to need some crypto. One of the possible rules that we could say is, okay, well, no lower layer can import from a higher layer. That's all I've got. Thanks for listening. Let's go eat.
Yeah, Walter's got his hand up.
Walter's always got his hand up. There's lots of things to say.
Well, actually, what I wanted to say is I wanted to thank you for taking on this challenge, and it's a big project, and I know you put a lot of effort into it, and we just want to say I appreciate your efforts with that. It's valuable work you're doing.
Well, thank you. And I want to make something clear. A lot of what's on this slide is my thoughts on how we can approach things. I am not an immovable object. And if you guys, things you disagree with, things that you think we could do better, this is me trying to respond to the community. They're saying certain things out there. Doesn't mean my responses are right, but I'm trying for you guys out there. So
It strikes me that if the goal is to move towards a richer standard library, a bigger library, doing that is going to require more participation from more people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has to align with the other goals that you've indicated about reducing barriers, making sure that there's a process for getting code reviewed and not getting blocked because one person can't find time or it's not interesting. On the other hand, you can't have a tyranny of a single contributor.
Right.
And so there's got to be balance, but critically, the thing is, when other people you're talking with are thinking about the process, part of that thinking on the process needs to consider what the end goal is, and if the goal is a more expansive library, enabling more of the community is going to be really important.
Yes, and as we might disagree with exactly how I'm suggesting we do that. But that's why I said that this is me throwing out ideas based on what I've heard from the community and from what the community's saying. Because if we have PRs that are blocked for 6 months because somebody won't review it, or they don't understand it, or they just don't wanna, then the community is going to take that is feedback to the community that says, we're not actually that interested in talking to you. You might be right, you might be wrong, but we're not interested in talking to you. And the community is going to take that and say, oh, well, I don't want to contribute.
I don't know if you started it, Adam, or somebody in Discord that was talking about another language's ability to get their kind of libraries moving along. This was referring to the more general thing, not standard exactly, but kind of candidates or feeders into the library, where they would actually give kind of scoring, seriously thought scoring attaboys, activity, bug fixes. And so basically there was a rating system, and surprisingly it worked. I mean, it was just like these authors who had been moribund, not done anything for 3 or 4 years, apparently came out of the woodwork and said, yeah, I can work on that. I can have my 4-star rating or whatever. I mean, I'm not sure that works here in the context of standard, but we need to look at kind of self-catalyzing activities if we can find them, right? So maybe an extra T-shirt at DConf or something. Yeah.
As I said, this is about looking for ideas.
The examples you listed for a large standard library were like C#, which is backed by Microsoft. There's like Java, which is backed by Sun Microsystems, and then later Oracle. I don't know how big the library is in Go, but they've got backing from Google. So the question is, do you know of another language that, in the absence of a large corporate backing, has been able to maintain and build a large standard library? Like, is there precedent for this being done?
I want to say Rust has gone a long way without large corporate backing. They have it now, but they didn't start that way. You could say, well, their standard library isn't as big as, say, .NET. And I am not suggesting that we're going to get anywhere near .NET or Java anytime soon. Some of this is going to be aspirational, just trying to convince people out there that we can do this and that we should do this. But when I look at things like HTTP, come on, guys. We need, in 2024, not having an HTTP client in the web world, we also have to acknowledge that, yes, we don't have that corporate backing. You're right, but we've got to do something about the key components that we're missing.
Yeah, things with long-lived standards make total sense. Like, I think the official standard for HTTP goes back to like 91. LDAP is like around the same time. Things that are stable, you can put in the work and it stays valid. But for things that are like vendor specific, like when you mentioned databases, so like the standard SQL, almost no one officially adheres to it.
So for database specifically, I've actually been working on ODBC stuff, and ODBC has been around since the 80s. What we could do is we could say, no, we're only going to do that. We're not going to do any vendor specific stuff. And we might have to make choices like that where we say, no, we're not going to support Oracle. We're not going to support MS SQL. We're not going to support MySQL. You have to run through the ODBC interface.
There was something I was a bit surprised to not see in your talk as a discussion about collections. Because to me, one of the glaring hole in the current Phobos is that we don't have like a set or,
So collections, I intentionally left out. I actually have a whole thing on collections, and that has been another area that we just don't have a good handle on what we're going to do, because everyone's kind of like, well, we need allocators to do that. Well, we don't have allocators. They're sitting in experimental. For Phobos 3, one of the things that has been suggested, and I'm not saying we have to do this, is we actually take all of containers and all of allocators and we pull them out into a separate package above sys, and we say, if you need those things, they're over there. My personal experience as a D programmer is between arrays and associative arrays, I've got 90% of what I need. Now, I also work with .NET and their concurrent collections library is really cool, and we don't have anything like that. So, yes, I intentionally did not cover containers because it's this huge point of contention with people not having any. Well, we need allocators, and other people like, just use the GC.
So if I may rebound on that, the whole allocator stuff, I understand why people are asking for it, but if you look at like real world C++ code base, for instance, that has an allocator parameter for every single one of its collection, real world use is probably 1% of the use of the allocator. and you have the use of the collection actually specify an allocator explicitly.
Yeah.
So I would be of the opinion that we can probably provide something standard that don't take an allocator, and then people that like specifically need to allocate in a specific way for their collection are probably going to find a way to do it. I mean, I'm doing it in my applications myself, so it's not that difficult.
Personally, I completely agree with you. I'm a GC guy. But if I'm designing a standard library, I have to think about everyone. We might end up doing something like what you described. Say, nope, those are the containers. They use the GC. You'll have to get over it. For now. Phobos 4, come back and talk to us when we've got our allocator story figured out.
I just want to make a comment on the whole standard library without corporate support. I mean, we do have 2,000 dub packages, so we've got people doing things. I think we can,
We can handle some stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I just want to say that.
Thank you, Attila.
Okay, so just one final remark about the collections, depending on the allocators. So I think that's really about the API, right, between the collections and the allocator, and that API is not that complicated. So if we can just settle on the API, but we don't need to settle on the rich set of allocators that the STD experimental allocator provides, I think we could move forward with the collectors.
I could see that. And Paul Bacchus, I think, is either working on that or has talked about what he would do for that. A lot of what I've actually been doing for this whole process is not necessarily doing all this work myself. It's going around to subject matter experts and saying, can you help with this? And different people have different things they care about. So that's what I have.
That's it then. Hooray.
Thank you.